Hello there, and welcome back to Parley, the show where you folks support the other stuff I make by paying me monthly to talk about the topic of your choice. And this month, Zezmeril has requested some discussion about good art, question mark. Zez says, been a long time since the last Parley request. Got a philosophical one this time around. What makes art good? What makes art art? With graphical design being an ever-growing industry, what would be the most important thing for society to learn when determining these answers? Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a lot about the art good, art thing, and we'll wrap it up in a questionably satisfying bow at the end by talking about, what would be something good to keep in mind, because there are so many people doing the art out there, right? Obviously, just like with every parlay, this is just what I think. At the same time, the central argument I'm going to make is that you can define art a lot of ways, but my way is more useful than all those other ways. So you should listen to me. Not because I'm right or wrong. You can't be right or wrong, because it's a matter of opinion, as we're going to get into. There is no consensus on who's right or wrong, so how would we decide that one person's opinion was more or less right? We can't. So the only way that you can then evaluate beyond an authority, because there is no real authority, which opinion, which way of thinking about art is more useful is which one is more useful. And I think mine is. So what is it? I think that the definition of art is that it is an exemplary expression. That's it. And what do I mean by that? Well, if somebody in 5th grade writes angsty poetry, like I did, that's art if it feels like an exemplary expression. Now, it probably won't, because a lot of people have done that. But again, you'll notice that there's really no binary there. It isn't art or not. It's like, how much is it art? How much does it correlate with art? Since there's no definition we can really all agree on, it's basically art to the degree that it is the word cloud of things that people think of when they think art. And I'm saying that that is basically like exemplary expression. So it being unusual or novel or a well-expressed version of an idea that people have heard of before, even if it isn't unusual or novel. Maybe it's unusually novelly bad. It's just very bad. That whole thing about the good entertainment being really bad and really good, and the mediocrity is what's boring. I think it's because the mediocrity is less art than the other things. It's less of a particular expression. It's less of an exemplary expression. Again, you can't really ever say that things are or are not art. In your own self-centered little bubble, it might seem that way. But if you polled the entire world, somebody would think that everything was art. And they're not really wrong in any way. That's not really possible. That's not definable. So that just means that that thing is less art or more art. It can't be art or not. It has to be less or more art. That's what I think. So there we go. Thanks for the parlay. No, I'm just kidding. But we're front loading the most useful part. That's what I think. I think that the useful definition of art is something is more or less art based on how much it is exemplary expression. I have actually have it here. A piece of paper, a handout that I got in a poetry class. I'm not going to read you all of it, but here it is, and it's mirrored because my camera's mirrored. You see at the top it says questions to ask of a poem up there. And at the bottom, at the list of 10 questions, you see one that looks a bit different because I wrote it, and I have a handwriting disorder, so my handwriting looks terrible. And the list of questions is like, what is the poem's form? Does it rhyme, and how and why? But at the bottom, I wrote for number 11, what does the poem do? What does it do? Another way you could answer this parlay would be to give a bunch of definitions of art, and we could then evaluate them. So let's do that a little bit. I'll give you other ones that I've had over the years. I'm not going to try to defend ones that I don't think are good at all, because I would just be making fun of them, basically. But right now, I think it's things are more or less art, dependent on how much they are, exemplary expression of something. And another way you could think of it is that art is something that does something, and it's more or less art based on how much it does something. My problem with this is that I feel like a lot of people that make art actually don't intend it to do something, and it in fact doesn't exactly do something. What do you mean by doing something, past Sandy? What did you mean by that? Because I feel like a lot of beautiful things that I've seen, for example, it doesn't have to be beautiful, but just as an example, they it's not like they didn't do anything, but they weren't exactly defined by their effectiveness at doing something. They had some sort of implacable impression on me. Another definition of art that some people would use is that it gives you an implacable impression. It gives you a feeling that you can't quite define. And I think that's ridiculous. That's to suggest that the less clear art is, the more it's art, which I think is preposterous when you put it that way. Obviously, art can be clear and still be art. I'm sure you've had a piece of work strike you with its simplicity and purity. Not that it was nothing, but just that it was like, wow, that's so succinct and concise. And aren't those things art? They're not abstract, but that doesn't make them not art, you know? And, I think that we should probably take a moment here to clarify that, I'm not talking about, I don't care that a lot of academia thinks of art as something profound. Like, nobody actually cares about that, though. Like, that's not valuable. What does profound mean? It's just confusing from a lot of academics' perspective. Something might be like actually profound, like the actual meaning of profound. It might be, whoa, that's a huge thought that I hadn't thought of before. If you've read Dune, I think the concept of the Bene Gesserit in Dune, if you haven't, go read it. This concept is worth the trip, in my opinion. That is a profound idea. I understood that idea for the first time and thought, it's like a zoom out, right? Your brain goes whoop and you go, what? Like, that's a whole thing you did there, right? Or sometimes you get a twist in a story after hundreds of episodes of One Piece or whatever, and something happens and you go, you've been planning this for that long? I felt that way very recently with One Piece. After an over 1,000 episode journey, I recently learned something about someone in One Piece, and that thing had been, I would almost say, made obvious from the very first episode, but it was just hiding in plain sight this whole time. And I don't know, it's just one of the better twists I've ever experienced, and it felt so elegant, so unforced. It didn't feel like cheating to me. That's just my opinion, but I know a lot of people felt that way. And again, it's only a matter of how much people think that is artful. I think it's a lot. I think that's amazing. There's a level of profundity. That is, it had impact. It was mentally large, I guess. You could say that's what profound means. But when a lot of academics say profound, they just mean nobody really understands this, or it is unclear, or we get to talk about my favorite subject, contingent difficulty. This is my little mini segment on contingent difficulty. Contingent difficulty is the concept of something in like a work that is a reference to something else such that you need to know that other separate thing, or this doesn't make sense. The text doesn't contain the information needed. You need to have gotten it from somewhere else. So a literary reference or a meme or etc. And I hate contingent difficulty. When I was in my English department, I was a nuisance to the professors because I believe that contingent difficulty is essentially always worse than something else you could do. And of course, it's not a matter of it being bad or good or no contingent difficulty or some. I just think that referencing things that people understand more is better than referencing something specific. I feel like it's just elitism that you can't defend. A lot of people would say that something like Finnegan's Wake, go Wikipedia what Finnegan's Wake is if you want more details, but basically it's just a really huge text with a otherworldly number of references, like indecipherably large number of references. This, like, every word is a reference to some complicated literary thing. That is just the most masturbatory work I've ever heard of in my entire life. Like, it's self-defeating. It is a non-entity that is a monument to the author's desire to make something inaccessible. Like, I don't know. And yet, clearly art by my first definition, because it certainly is an exemplary expression of idiocy, but exemplary nonetheless. And then my other definition, I said I want it to do something, which I would argue it really doesn't. It doesn't affect action in the world. It does something, which is to piss me off, which I guess is fine. And you could define it that way, but it kind of depends what you mean by what does it do, like by doing something. Brain expansion, impressing you, making you smile or laugh or cry, emotion, like what counts as doing something? I don't know. Or maybe you could say it has to do something useful, right? It makes me angry, Finnegan's Wake, but not, it doesn't lead to anything. I just hate it. Like, you see what I'm trying to say? Whereas you can have anger. Anger can be a very active emotion. Enemies in a video game that you hate could be artfully hateful. They could move you to action, to make a build to destroy them. But Finnegan's Wake, I would argue, doesn't do that unless you want to physically destroy your copy of Finnegan's Wake, which I highly recommend. Burn it with fire. Does that make sense? So those are some definitions to play around with. I guess what does it do? The more helpful definition based on that I think now would be doing something has to mean leading to something. Like something else like actually happens, something productive occurs because of this thing. Now, just to be clear, that doesn't mean it needs to be positive, although I think it usually needs to be positive. Maybe you read a work of romance, and this causes you to end your relationship, but that is progress in some form in your life. The fact that it was destructive on the surface doesn't make that not. It still did something that led to something that was productive in some way. It doesn't have to be something positive, although, I think it usually is. Is most art positive? That seems true. Is that true? I don't know. Okay. Well, anyway, that was a whole word cloud about definitions of art or what makes art good. That's what I think. I think that the only definition you can actually use for that is it being exemplary expression or it leading to something. And even then, I feel like those are connected. They're almost always synonymous. I hope I gave you some good examples, mostly of things that I dislike. But anyway, yeah. And so again, I think the mundane, the middle of the road thing, it's not that it isn't art. I don't think that's helpful. There's just not really any meaning besides self-satisfaction or the desire to be right by saying this is art, isn't art. But you can cast your vote among with the other billions of people in the world for what you think it is, and all those votes combined, the percentage of those votes, that is maybe the answer to whether it is art. And of course, that answer will always be yes and no, but various amounts. So that's what I think. I would love to hear other people's definition of art, by the way. Nobody can possibly be right, you know. And if you state your definition as though it is right in some appreciable way, you're automatically wrong because that's just not possible. But I like my definitions, and that's why. I think they're more useful. But I haven't heard very many people give non-textbook definitions of art, and I would really enjoy that. So hit me. What you got? Now, the other part of your question was what to learn about art, maybe based on that stuff. And I think that the first clear thing is that the quality of art, it seems to be a bit secondary. I almost feel like something being unique makes it good. I would go so far as to say. There's this thing where people tell you to consume a lot of the media that you want to make. And I almost feel like that most of the benefit there is just that you know what's already been made a bit better, and you don't make something that is redundant feeling to the audience. A really easy example of this is the proliferation in anime of the isekai genre, or just shows that are almost exactly the same thing as other shows, basically. Characters go to another world and have a experience in this fantasy world that is often shockingly similar to that of another show. There's some really over-the-top examples of this sometimes, not just of isekai shows, but of shows that are like way too similar. A really funny one that I enjoyed watching both of was The Asterisk War and Chivalry of a Failed Knight. These shows both came out at a similar time, maybe even the same time. Was it the same season? A similar time. Maybe I just watched them at a similar time. They totally came out at a similar time. They were made by different studios, but they both featured like a stereotypical looking, edgy sword boy protagonist with a pink haired, fire controlling princess character. And they were at a magical academy where the whole thing is gonna be a tournament arc, and that's only the tip of the iceberg of the similarities. And so the question becomes like, is that anti-art because they were sort of the same? I personally thought that Chivalry of a Failed Knight, which I don't know if I really recommend, but did do some things that were a little bit remarkable, which made me feel like I thought it was a lot better. But why is basically where I'm going with this. And it's because it did more things, basically. But really, when I think about that, no, it's not like more things happened. What I mean is it did more things I hadn't seen done as often. Right? Were those things really better? You could make a bunch of arguments why maybe they were, but at the end of the day, it's shockingly correlated with the fact that I just had seen less anime that did those things, basically. You know, huh. So I don't know. If you do something with a purpose, it will be kind of good. That's a whole thing. This is sort of just advice for creating in general. There is a hubris to thinking that your things ought to exist instead of other things. People have limited time. They have to consume your things instead of something else. And I think that the key to that hubris is to understand that there's no material value to them consuming one thing or another. So really it boils down to, well, but does your thing need to exist? Do you want to make a thing? Don't just make things. Nobody cares about that. Do you want to say or draw or record a thing? Do you want to? Is there like a reason for it? Is it for an individual person like this is? Were you asked to? Would it make someone happy? Is it a counterexample for something else? Were you inspired and you wanted to do something that it doesn't have to be totally different from everything else. It could be something that you saw a game and thought, this is really cool. That mechanic could be really interesting in this type of game. And then you do it. I think those are often really good. Like games that do that are often very good, even though they might seem to be pretty derivative of another game, but they have purpose. Like that derivation is purposeful. I think that is often reads as good, which is all that something being good even means. If people think it's vaguely good, then there you go. Something being popular doesn't mean it's good. This whole argument could be viewed as me saying that what defines art is whether it's populist, basically. And I don't mean that, because after all, whether something is unique or not may depend quite heavily on whether people are familiar with its competitors. For example, a lot of really popular anime is a good example I'm familiar with. They're archetypes, or video games too. They're not the best games, not that there are necessarily best games, but I don't feel like they're among the most impressive games. I feel like they're the most obvious games, basically. Like Call of Duty. It's not that it's like terrible or the best or whatever. That stuff doesn't mean anything. It's just really obvious. It's just like, of course, this is a game that exists, right? I sort of feel like League of Legends is a weird one, but it being unique makes it, there's other games in that genre that are doing something similar. But this one does it in a kind of straight-laced way. I remember comparing to like Dota, for example. Dota had this whole thing. I love this item. You could like eat trees to heal, and then you could use the tree eating to make paths to invade other lanes or like surprise your opponent. A really cool mechanic, but just weird, like just out there and weird. A lot of League of Legends design, in my opinion, is unweird. Again, it's not like good or bad, but it's archetypical. Does that make sense? And these things are popular because if you are just getting into that thing, the one at the front, the most straightforward version of that concept, you're not looking for something specific. It's gonna be that. And so those are popular not because they're better or worse, but because they're, again, I guess just kind of obvious, or there's no need for them to be more unique if you have seen no other examples of that thing. But then people play some more video games and they tire of the really obvious game. They want something maybe more particular. I've noticed that people tend to argue that the less popular of a variety of games in a genre is better. You tend to hear people coming out stronger for that game being better. There could be a lot of reasons for this. It could be because people feel like there's no need to argue for the most popular one because popular means good, which it doesn't, but people act that way. I think a lot of people do genuinely think that. It's like, well, if other people think it's good, right? Like, how could so many people be wrong? Well, very easily, because it's just you copied a bunch of times. Could you alone be wrong? Yes, very easily. And so what would be remarkable about a whole bunch of people? You also being wrong. Nothing at all. They could easily be wrong. Things being popular just means they're general, not good or bad. And I hope that makes sense, how people who've consumed maybe more of a thing, maybe they're going to gravitate toward the ones that are more specific, or that are like a weirder, more particular interpretation. But yeah, I've talked a lot about uniqueness. I'm not trying to suggest that I think that is the core thing. I'm just trying to say that I think that explains a lot of people's behavior when they look for games or pieces of work, when they play these things. There's more to say about. I think of abstract art and like coffee brewing are two simple, very different examples. Those things are not bad or a waste of time fussing over putting a lot of effort into your cup of coffee being good. Pour overs, which I feel like are just less reliable immersion brews, and nobody can tell me what like tastes different about a pour over. There may very well be something. I'm looking forward to looking into this more, but I don't feel like anybody is. When people talk about that thing, they don't say, they just say they like the taste of it, but not compared to anything else. And you start to think, well, if it's more trouble and they both taste good, if this person would think both of them taste good, if you like the AeroPress and a V60, why are you brewing the V60? You know, does it taste better? And they'll say, I like how it tastes. And you say, in what ways? Like how? I just haven't heard people give good answers to that. I really hope to someday. I'm sure there are good answers to it. People don't seem to be focused on that. It's not because there's no point in doing that thing, probably. It's because there's more to do with that thing. That's where I'm going with this. The abstract art breeds conversation. You might have your own opinion about a bunch of what seems to you like just shapes and blocks of color on the page. You might have your own feelings about like what value that does or doesn't have. But we can at least agree that it's certainly less straightforward what you would then say about that. Let's say you and I are having a conversation, and there's the Mona Lisa right there. Have a conversation with me about the Mona Lisa, and then we'll put up a more abstract piece of artwork. You can agree that the conversation we will then have is less straightforward than the conversation about the Mona Lisa, right? Which, if you want to spend a lot of time with something, you like a medium, you would want something to do, basically. And if you're pour over, your V60 or whatever, I'm not trying to dump on the V60. I love the V60. I've got one right here with a thing attached to it that makes it into an immersion brewer. But anyway, just saying, not trying to, no hate for the V60 here. It's not bad to do that thing. If you enjoy the hobby, why would spending more time on it be bad? It's just not automatically good either. Like, putting more effort in doesn't magically make it better. It just doesn't magically make it worse either. And I think it's pretty easy to understand why so many people do a brewing method that there is no widely understood benefit to. It simply takes a bit more work than another brew method that most people like, but which takes less work. Why would one be more popular than the other? And again, let's just assume for the moment that there's no meaningful quality difference between the two. There's probably a flavor profile difference, but neither of them is in any objectifiable way like better or worse. Immersion brewing is mathematically kind of superior. You get more coffee out of your beans, but that's a topic for another time. My point is, you'll notice that the people more into the thing will do the method that is more work, basically, that is more involved, for seemingly no benefit or detriment, like just sort of because. And this is going to bring me to the end of this parlay. You might be thinking, well, none of that is actually useful, Zandy. Like, that's interesting. That's an interesting point. That does indeed happen. That correlates with a thing that I see in reality. I hope you think that. I think that's true. But anyway, I don't know. Look around, see what you think. Maybe not. But here's my thing. So then what do I do? Do I make something general because it will be accessible? Do I make something unique because it will serve a niche market that maybe has less of that thing? What should I make? Well, you should make what you want to make, but you want it to be useful. You're not trying to compromise on your vision. Some of you maybe are thinking, I just want to make something that, like, there's a point in making. Well, don't make anything too general or too specific. And so if you take that mindset, you should make the thing in the middle. That's what I think. Make something that is specific, but still applicable, broadly useful. Something that maybe a lot of people don't think about, but which would benefit a lot of people if they thought about it. No need to limit yourself, but picking a topic that is particular without being niche seems like a good approach. I think that Buildcraft is particular without being niche. It's not a way a lot of people think about the world, but it is something that almost everybody does from time to time. It does benefit everyone if they were to think in that way. And I do think that a lot of buildcrafting games could be fun for a very wide variety of people. Maybe not literally everyone, but that's fine. The way I'm tackling the subject is pretty specific, but it's not something that is specifically good. It's something that could be generally good. I'm just tackling it in a specific way. It isn't for only me. Maybe you'd say it that way. I have a weird feeling about games like, what's a good example? I guess like fighting games that have a lot of button inputs to do combos and stuff. It feels like this game, it kind of exists as a popular thing, but can't actually be played by any meaningful number of people. And so it kind of begs the question for me, like, why wouldn't that, it's going to be marketed and popular, but it sort of feels like, why, I don't know. Personally, it doesn't appeal to me to work that hard on something that I should know by the nature of its design. Like, most people just kind of can't do, they can't interact with, I don't think it would even be good if they did. I think fighting games are really interesting. Fighting game culture is a whole enigma. But I think for many people, like, they would not have a better life if they spent a ton of time learning fighting game combos. I think there are certain types of people who can make magic happen with those things. And I'm not sure how you find those people. But in any case, it's not most people, I don't think. I don't know, maybe that's not true, but that's a simple example I can give you. And so personally, it doesn't appeal to me to work hard on that. It feels like I'm making something that I'm purposefully designing to disallow other people to enjoy it. Like, why? Even in these videos, I think it's always kind of a shame that there can't be more hooks in the video that let other people into the topic. I always want people to feel like they're not lost about the thing we're discussing. And hopefully this has been an actionable discussion about what art could be considered to be, rather than being too abstract. But it is a pretty open-ended topic. I think the main actionable advice is just to consider what good even means, to try to keep the financial viability of the art separate from what you want to make. And I think if you make something with purpose, you make something you really want to make, and be very wary anytime you kind of need to put out something, need to make something. Be guarded about that. Find a solution for that. Maybe a good piece of advice at the end would be to have a plan. That's a decent piece of advice. Look at the problems that you see in art, or that I'm suggesting in the pursuit of art, and have a plan for what to do about them. That might seem like obviously, but I think most people don't. What are you going to do when you feel burnt out? When you feel burnt out, because you will. What are you going to do? What are you going to do to pay the bills? Are you going to try to make that be art? How are you going to compromise? What are you going to do to maintain the vision that you have, the thing that you want to make, while still making money? Is it going to be sustainable for your body, for your mind? Are you going to feel lonely? Is it going to hurt your wrists? What are you going to do about these things? Don't try to do it because it's like a fantastical dream. Do it with preparation. Go on the adventure with a backpack of supplies on your back. You idiot, is what I would say to my younger self if they were here.